everyone, thanks for joining us for another episode of The Ghost Furnace. I am Bond, and I'm here as always with my cohort, Nick Pennsylvania. How you doing, Nick?
I'm doing really grand.
That's excellent, man. That's what I like to hear. It is a soggy spring evening here in western Pennsylvania, and the weather is perfect, I think, for some like spooky stories. I think that this time of year, people don't usually think of spring as being like a spooky time of the year, but I think there's something really like romantic in the literary sense of like flowers springing from the dead looking earth.
Well, I think this is the time of year too where we have the most misty days. And looking
Yes.
outside, as you say, it's been really soggy. Well, I'm
Mm-hmm.
here to tell you, I was up in the mountains and just on
Mm-hmm.
Tuesday, I correct myself, Tuesday, I was driving through 4 inches of snow.
Oh, you were up
Up,
north with all that snow
I
that they
was up in
got.
Tionesta the other
Oh,
day.
geez. I heard
I had
about
to,
that.
I had to get to
Yeah.
North Warren,
Yeah.
and yeah, it was bad. And
Yeah.
up there, it's like it's no stranger. You're in the
Right. You're
mountains, and
used to it. Yeah.
it's
But
it's interesting because you are elevated. I know people out west will hear us talk about mountains, but
right.
it is. Get over it.
Yeah.
It's that coupled with the fact that we have Lake Erie, and
Mm-hmm.
then the jet stream. If you look at 80, the
Mm-hmm.
highway that runs east-west through the Commonwealth of PA, it really bisects the Commonwealth, and the
Mm-hmm.
jet stream is right. It's
Over it.
generally right over it. So
Yeah.
if it goes this way or that, just a little bit, that dip can make for some dramatic change in weather
Mm-hmm.
and the topography, and including the lake. And Lake
Right.
Erie is the shallowest of the lakes, so I think
Mm-hmm.
that affects things more dramatically meteorologically. So yeah, 4 inches of snow. One of the lawyers I was meeting with, she drives from Clearfield County. That's all I'll say.
Okay. Yeah.
The highway into Clearfield, they were closing, and she said I
Mm.
couldn't get up it. I had to go take a circuitous country route, which was totally covered.
Yeah.
62 was totally covered. I was between the mountain and the Allegheny River. It
Oh,
was
over there. Yeah.
so
That's
when you say it's not spooky, I say I had a harrowing
right. Yeah.
journey the other day.
Might not be spooky, but it sure is scary.
Yeah, I did lose control at one point outside Tidiute.
Ugh. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
fun times.
and like, and everyone like out there knows that like, it's like the unexpected inclement weather sometimes that like gets
Yes.
that like because I mean it's not like we never have snow in April, but it's not every year that we have significant snow like that in
And
April.
even though they were
You know.
calling for this, I think a
Right.
lot of us felt that because the roads have been dry, because the
Hmm.
roads being warm, accumulate in the way that it did. And it was crazy. I made it to North Warren. Tionesta is the county seat it's a very small county. It's our second least populated,
Yeah.
but it is the county seat of the immediate Warren. So some people drive from there. When I got into Warren, it was like a dusting, and I was in meetings for like 3 hours. And when I came back, the roads were still wet, but the roads were totally devoid of snow. You would never have thought that
Have
there
known.
was
Yeah.
anything like the snow that there was just a couple hours prior.
Just
So,
a little bit of disappearing evidence.
yeah. Yeah, well, I was glad that one of the ladies I work with, she took photos. And I guess one of her relatives, I think one of her brother's photo
Hmm.
of the area made it onto their local county web news
Oh,
thing.
really? Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So
Anywho.
anyway, so we were chatting the other day about, well, what do we want to talk about? And we were both working on something. I feel like you've been pulling a lot of weight lately with pulling up stories and everything. So I was like, well, I better. And I'll tell you what, I initially went looking for a story I had heard as a child.
Okay.
And in the process of trying, like putting down some of the details to narrow down, try to find that story,
Hmm.
I came across a different story only to realize, only to it to be revealed to me, rather, that these two stories are connected very strongly
I love when
through a
that
single
happens.
pen. Yeah. So I'm gonna tell you the story I was trying to find first, and I'll keep it very brief.
Okay.
And I'm curious if you have heard this one. So I think I first heard this story. I know I was definitely in elementary school. I cannot remember if it was prior to our moving to Western Pennsylvania or not. So there's a chance I picked this up very early. When we
Mm-hmm.
first moved to Pennsylvania, we initially moved to the Philadelphia area, and we were only there for a matter of months. That has nothing to do with the story at hand, but
Well, Philadelphia keeps trying to claim you as their own,
that's
and
so.
there's a little bit of a contention around that. So
Well,
that is
it's
relevant.
nice to be wanted.
It is. It is.
So anyhow, when I read this, I was thinking of aliens. And when I
Okay.
was that young, I was definitely like, well, this is pretty damning evidence.
Yeah.
So
Nice.
the story is this. And again, I'm curious if you've heard this one. So there was a teen boy. It's snowy. Supposedly, this is outside of Quincy, Indiana. Is that,
Okay.
or is it Muncie, Indiana, or regardless, somewhere in the American Midwest where snow accumulates, and this young man is going out. I believe it's to a spring house or to a well. The family sees him walking out, and at some point they hear him calling or crying out. So they go to the door to see what the matter is, and they should be able to see him, but it's night and they don't. So they're following his footsteps essentially. Not that they have to follow his footsteps, they know where he was going to, but the footsteps stop
Ooh.
in the middle and there's nothing. It's like he'd been lifted up and they can hear his voice. And some described it as seeming to echo. Some say it sounded like it was coming from the air. And this is in 1880s ish. So, late 19th century for certain. And this is the story of Charles Ashmore. Charles Ashmore
Hmm.
being the young man who was lifted up. Now, at the time the story first came about, no one was talking about aliens, to my
Right.
knowledge. But of course, when I was reading this in the late 1980s, early 1990s, that's the only thing I could conclude because I was predisposed. Thank you, Leonard
Right.
Nimoy. So, have you ever heard that story?
Not particularly. No.
Okay. So, I'm going to tell you another story.
What
Oh,
year
go
was it?
on.
I'm sorry. What year was
No,
it
it's
again?
fine.
About?
1880s,
Okay. So
early
like,
1880s, 1870s.
I mean, it sounds like because it's funny because you're right. It sounds like a modern UFO thing, but at the time they really didn't have like the vernacular for that and some of the existing tropes. Now there were like the airship flaps in the 1800s that often get like conflated with early UFO reports,
And we
but most
definitely need to talk about that sometime
at
because
some
I'm not
point.
super familiar.
But this sounds very different than that. So no, I don't think I'm familiar with this. I'm interested.
Yeah, so I have another story, and I'm going to come back to Charles Ashmore. So when I was trying to find the Charles Ashmore story, because of course I couldn't remember the name, I was just kind of typing it in. It led me to disappearances, and it led me to this other one before I made it to what I was looking for.
Hmm.
And again, as I alluded, the two are connected. So, have you ever heard the story of David Lang?
That name sounds familiar.
Okay.
So I'm curious.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah. So here's the story. And again, I'm not going to go super detailed
Hmm.
because you can go out and find that. And people don't come to us for lots of great detail. They come to us for just the raw charisma.
Just yeah, the witty banter,
Right.
and
So this we have a specific date. Again,
mhm.
I have listened to and read a couple different versions of this, so I'm going to try to incorporate a few of the elements and kind of say
Different
when they differ
sources. Yeah.
dependent on
Hmm.
storyteller. So in September of 1880, outside Gallatin, Tennessee, there's this David Lang guy. He has a farm and I'm assuming he's fairly well to do. I'm not saying he's like a big magnate or anything, but he's friends with the judge. His family has a cook or some sort of servant in the home as well who lives with them. But he's come back from either a business trip in Nashville or he was away for some other reason, again, dependent upon the story that you hear. So anyhow, he comes home and he's there for a little while. He gives his kids, he's got two kids, Sarah and George, his wife Emma, and this woman that some sort of servant. Some say cook, some say maid.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, no, I don't know a lot of farms that have a maid, but regardless, at some point early on to getting home, he's walking out to the pasture to greet and check on his horses. They have a few horses, and his friend, a Judge Peck, is accompanied by another man. They're riding in on a buggy, and they approach the property, and they're coming to visit. You know, because his friend's been away, David's been away, and with his wife Emma either sitting on the porch or looking from out a window in the house, dependent on the storyteller. She's viewing David, and either way, as is Judge Peck and his companion. David's walking, turns around, waves, and begins to walk towards the judge to greet him at the house,
Mm-hmm.
and vanishes. Boom. In sight, in sight
Of like the
of
two
three
different
witnesses.
parties. Yeah. Okay.
Three adult witnesses, right? So immediately they go run over there and okay, you've heard that much. What would you suspect could have happened?
He fell in a hole.
Sure.
That's
Yeah.
like there's ditches, like, and we all know how weird terrain can be, even if, because again, he was distracted. He saw his friends, go to see. So like, I mean, like that's my first thought is just the dude fell down.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Even just fell down, but
Right.
sometimes sinkholes happen. We live just a few miles north of where an entire city bus was consumed by a sinkhole.
Well, we had that lady who fell in a sinkhole looking for a cat and died.
Oh my gosh.
Remember that?
Yeah. That was only
Just a few months ago. Yeah.
Okay,
So
in the
it's
Pittsburgh,
yeah, it's a real thing. People just poof.
well,
Yeah.
and the wildest thing about that story, so this was just a few months ago in the Pittsburgh region, a woman was literally steps from a back door of a building looking for a cat, and a sinkhole opened up, and it took 3 days. I think it was
find
3
her.
or 4
Yeah.
days to find
It was
her
a
body.
long time. It was a
It was
big
awful.
ordeal. Yeah, it was
And
really
it was
sad.
so cold out that even if she had survived the fall, which I don't know if she did or not, she would have passed to exposure. There's nothing good about it. And
Right.
a lot of these sinkholes are due to just how much mining was in this region.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah. So sinkholes,
So that's where my head goes first. It's just the guy was walking and just
in Tennessee,
Yeah.
I mean, not a far cry from Kentucky, where we have the
Well,
largest known cave system.
right.
and
I was just about to
everything.
say. Yep.
Mammoth
So
Caves,
that's
been there.
that's not that's yeah. I mean that's not a terrible. That's not as far fetched as it might sound. Yeah.
No, it's not, and it's totally reasonable. The three adults go running to the spot where they last saw him, and then he was gone, and they find nothing, but they hear him kind of muffled. So obviously, somebody, I think it's Peck's companion, goes into the town, Gatlin, Tennessee. They round up people, they muster people to try to find David, and they are not successful. This is obviously a big deal. Some people can hear him. Some say he sounds muffled. This goes on for a while, and his voice starts to get fainter. The stories go that the area from which he disappeared, initially it's innocuous, but they can find no sinkhole. They can find the ground's solid. It's just packed.
Right.
But the grass has kind of got a yellowish tint to it. The horses stay away from it. They claim that insects stay away from it. There's multiple retellings of this story talk about a cricket or a grasshopper being thrown into the circle, the area where he disappeared, goes silent, and is just trying to get out of there and doesn't continue making noise until it gets out of that area. But there's more to the story. So Emma, the wife, she eventually says to this Judge Peck that, hey, You don't be looking up anything because
No, I'm
there's
taking notes. I'm taking
okay, okay,
notes.
okay.
Yeah.
All right, all right. I'm gonna pull the rug out under all that in
Yeah,
a
no,
little bit.
I'm already hook, line, and sinker on this. So
But so far, a good story. It's
yeah,
pretty
yeah,
captivating.
it is. Yeah.
So the wife, Emma, after some time, says to Judge Peck, I can't live here anymore.
Right.
We need to lease the farm, and part of the lease is that the area where David disappeared, we need to leave that part of the pasture untouched. That's the only clause on the
Mm-hmm.
lease. Well, after a while, they just sell the farm. Emma dies not too long, maybe a couple years or so after all
Mm-hmm.
this is how the story is told. And so that story was around for a while. Then
No resolution. No
no
like.
resolution yet. So, I said the children were Sarah and George.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Sarah, as an adult, what's the happening thing from the 1880s all the way into after World War One is the spiritualist movement.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So she goes through, she's really involved in that. She's trying to communicate with her mother. She's trying to find her father. She supposedly goes to mediums and seances
Mm-hmm.
and is connected with her mother. She herself becomes, she starts to accumulate the accoutrements of the
Okay. Yeah.
spiritualist,
Mm-hmm.
and has regular contact with her mother who is on the other side of the veil, and she's
Yeah.
still
Yeah.
searching for David. And
Hmm.
apparently Sarah is getting distraught over this
Yeah.
because she's like, how long can this go on even after death?
Right.
And the story goes that in a compulsion, she starts doing an automatic writing session. You're
Oh,
familiar?
okay. No, no, yeah, I think automatic writing is fascinating. So yeah, go ahead.
No, no, it's fine. Well, during that, she's communing with her mother, who writes, hey, together now and forever, after many years, God bless you, is kind of the
Okay.
final thing and Sarah coming out of this looks at this
Mm-hmm.
and she's like, that is not my handwriting, but she has a book where her father
Right.
had written just a
Mm-hmm.
little message. And so she notices this writing looks similar.
To
Supposedly, a
his.
writing expert
Okay.
looks at it and she's like, "Oh, this is your father's writing."
Mm-hmm.
So you weren't
Wow.
channeling your mother; you were channeling your
My
father. And,
father.
yeah, David,
Wow.
who had just gone missing
Yeah.
in front of three pairs of eyes for a total of six eyeballs. It doesn't
Yeah.
say if anybody was missing any, so I assume they were all accounted for.
Yeah.
So the story, well, I'll get back to the exciting conclusion, but that's kind of the story. David's coming back from somewhere, having been away, sees the family, goes out to check on his horses. A friend comes riding up with another friend, and
Mm-hmm.
in view of his wife and these two guys on a buggy, he just disappears. And the wife, distraught, dies. The daughter, distraught, tries to connect
Yeah.
with her deceased parents. And after many years, in 1920, gets a message from
Yeah. I mean,
her
that's
dad.
significantly later. That's 40 years later. That's not like.
40 years. So this
Yeah.
child, we can assume, is at least 40, let's
Yeah.
just say 45 at
Mm-hmm.
least.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, before I go into anything more, I'm curious of what your thoughts are.
So that's a really cool. I never heard that before. That's a really cool story. There's a few things that it kind of reminds me of, and I'm sure you've thought about this. I'm sure other people have thought about this too. But my first thought is this sounds remarkably like a lot of like the Fae elements. Anytime you talk about a circle or just a specific area that is just like weird or bad, not to say bad, but just weird or things happen, even outside of like Fae stuff. I was reading a book recently, which I'm hoping that we'll get the author on, and he has a story. It's a lot of like just like not to say mundane, but just things like how things add up in certain areas where just like there's just like too much weird stuff in one area. And one of the things that this author talks about is how, this is like in suburban Pittsburgh, and these folks have this like patch of grass, in the front of their yard. Just like weird stuff keeps like happening, showing up on, and like has just it's a 4x4 triangle of grass, and weird things just keep happening there. So like it makes me whether that is related to Fae stuff, whether it's related to ley lines, whether it's like almost like some kind of spiritual or elemental scarring on the earth that changes it. I don't know, but you hear that in stories where just like there's certain areas that are just strange for one reason or another. I think the fact that they could hear him in a muffled way is really interesting, which is funny because one, that leads again towards the cave element, um, because if someone's underground, you're not going to be able to hear them very well, but you might be able to hear them enough, that you can hear that there is in fact a voice. One of the things with those sinkholes and those cave entrances, I think people think that entrances to large caves are always these big, grand openings in the side of a
Large
mountain.
cave, large door.
Yeah,
Sure.
exactly. Yeah. Especially around here, and I'm sure it's the same with Kentucky. There are times where there are cave entrances that are, no, that are smaller than a manhole cover that lead into these humongous caverns.
Or just a little slit in the ground. Like I think of
Right,
Penn's Cave, which is that
right.
underwater cave we have.
Correct.
The
Yep.
original opening, it was essentially just like a small gouge in the earth that
Right.
you'd have to squeeze through.
So again, the odds of him falling into something that was maybe had like some sort of like lever like action to it. Like I know that sounds that sounds very Scooby Doo, but like, could it be possible unless you're standing in exactly the right place, the Earth doesn't open up the right way? But if that many people were looking for him, you'd think that someone would have eventually retrod over that same ground. So,
Well, and how
so
long were they living there too? That if it's
right,
you know,
like. Yeah, it's especially unless there's any like recent, if there was like recent rains or something, because otherwise, yeah, that sounds more like Faye stuff where he slipped into some veil, and was half in, half out of, our realm or whatever you want to call it. Because there are stories about that. When we talked to Travis Watson about his book about the mists. There's a few of those stories where people get lost in mists, and people report being able to hear people but not be able to see them, find them, and they assume it's just, oh, it's because we physically can't see each other because of this fog. But then learn that there is some sort of corporeal element to it after the fact. So the fact that folks were talking about these stories in rural, like that's a lot of tropes that I just kind of like rattled off that I don't know if those would have been relevant enough for people to pull from in order to cover up a murder in rural Kentucky in 1880. Because it sounds like, again, like I'm not saying anyone's nefarious, but if you have two groups of people that are just like, oh, you know, Dave disappeared, like whoops a daisy, like I don't know where he went. He just disappeared into nothing,
he walked into my knife. That was the last I saw him.
Right. Yeah. And if like 3 hours later, Emma's like, ah, shucks, I guess we just have to leave. Like, I guess Dave's gone.
Pull up
Um,
stakes.
right. Yeah. It's such a strange story because none of those obvious either tropes or explanations seem to kind of like fit,
So
So
yeah,
it's a weird story. It's a weird
it's a weird
story.
story. It's a
Yeah.
captivating story. It's got
Yeah.
some original elements
It
to it.
does. Yeah.
So the story continues a little bit, and this is where some turns happen. So 1929, the daughter Sarah. Okay, so this is now almost 60 years later, or 50 years later, meets with the writer Stuart Palmer. Now, you might not be familiar with Stuart Palmer. He was a pretty decent deal back in his days. He was most
Hmm.
active in the 30s. He had this whole Hildegard Wither a series of books. I can't think if there's any if you that you might know of.
But it was
I
popular at his time. Yeah.
Yeah, popular at his time. I think he did some screenwriting. I know he worked with Craig Rice, who, if you're not familiar with Craig Rice, she is stone cold, and she was an awesome writer, but she was one of these like doomed writers. She's kind of like a Charles Bukowski sort that just
Okay. Yeah.
didn't. didn't survive,
Yeah.
but terrible youth, and it caught up with her, I think. But
Mm-hmm.
they were friends. Stuart Palmer and Craig Rice were pretty well regarded within the Chicago writers, Sherwood Anderson, people like that.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's
You're right.
legitimate
Yeah. Like
writers,
well known. Yeah.
detective stuff and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. Well, Stewart published, well, he met with Sarah supposedly in 1929 and saw this letter from the
Mm-hmm.
auto writing session.
Right.
He said, "Look, we got it analyzed by an expert handwriting analysis person
Mm-hmm.
that authenticated that this is a different person that wrote this part versus the onset of the auto writing session." And he writes this story down about David Lang, which is published. I forget the name of the periodical, but it was kind of like a science fiction and weird, strange
One of
tales
those.
sort of
Yeah.
publications.
Yeah. Yeah.
He doesn't publish that until 1953.
Okay.
So here's the deal. Later on, the same publisher in the 70s would do some more digging because this story has really got legs. It's a
Mm-hmm.
captivating story,
Yeah.
and it doesn't really have a real strong conclusion, but there is some sort of conclusion to it. We still don't know how he disappeared,
Mm-hmm.
why he disappeared,
Yeah. The mechanism is. Yeah.
right, is lost to us,
Mm-hmm.
but we have some sort of evidence that he is reconnected with his wife and
Right.
that there's some sort
There's.
of satisfaction.
Right. Right. Right.
And it's also, endearing to us because this is a daughter who cares and loves her parents so much that even years after they're dead, she's still looking for them. So
Mm-hmm.
pulls at a lot of those things, but they can't find any record of this Lang family in this area of Tennessee at that time.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, there's no evidence for it now.
Yeah.
Despite, I mean, people are gonna say, yeah, 1880. So yeah, but record keeping was better than maybe you think.
Right.
But also that's one thing. But there's no judge. There's no Judge Peck. There's no evidence of a Judge Peck
Mm,
ever existing there.
okay.
Now, in fairness, I didn't go and search through the county archives myself, so I'm going by what a couple writers have
Right.
said, have written
Hmm.
down, have claimed, but there doesn't seem to be any evidence to support this. But what there is evidence to support is that, well, that letter, apparently that was all Stuart Palmer. So
Oh,
Stuart
really?
Palmer didn't create this story out of whole cloth, though. Are you familiar with the American misanthrope Ambrose Bierce?
Oh, yes. Absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. And Ambrose
Yeah.
Bierce, what did he famously do?
So he wrote, what was that? The Owl one? Oh, the
Owl
Owl. Yeah.
Creek?
Yeah. Owl Creek Bridge. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He
Yeah.
wrote a lot of other things too, but
Yeah. But that's like the one you wrote. Yeah. Yeah. But that's the one we've talked about on multiple occasions about on this show.
yeah. Well, he also famously disappears in 1914.
Oh,
Now,
really? I
he
don't think
was
I
on
knew
his
that.
way. Yeah. Oh, you didn't know. How did you not know
I
that?
don't think
I
I knew
feel like more
that.
people, I think more people are aware of his, not calling you out on this, but more people are
No.
probably aware of his mysterious disappearance than are
Aware
really
of
that
him.
familiar with his writing. But
Well, we
yes,
had we I didn't know that because
in in
we had to read it in ninth grade, I think, ninth or tenth grade. We had to read that, so that's why I was familiar with it. But um,
well,
anywho,
yeah,
okay.
he was on his way. He participated at least
Hmm.
in part in parts of the Mexican Revolution. He was on his way to meet with Pancho Villa. I think he did meet with Pancho Villa.
Oh, okay,
Now, some say
yeah,
he died in Mexico. Some say he died
yeah.
of illness in Texas.
Hmm.
Some say he made it to South America, which was his final destination, and died
Yeah,
there somewhere. Some claim there's an unmarked grave in Texas where he is buried.
yeah.
There's, you know, others say he went down south and committed suicide.
Hmm.
All of these things are completely possible,
Hmm.
and But yeah, kind of famous contrarian. I dig him. I think his writing holds up. Honestly, I find him a just supremely interesting character in American
Oh
history.
yeah, yeah. This is all
He
coming
was
back to
a
me now. Yeah. Okay.
he's a it was in the Civil War. Saw a
Mm-hmm.
lot of
Yeah, he was a
action
veteran.
and
Yeah.
was injured pretty significantly, is my understanding. And
Mm-hmm.
apparently it changed his personality. Yeah, just a supremely interesting character. So the bottom line, though, is Ambrose Bierce had written a couple short stories. I don't know if they were first published in the newspapers or if they were published in a book initially. I couldn't remember that, and I was trying to do some research in preparation today, but I just didn't find that answer. But he had written this story of David
Mm-hmm.
Lang. Now, I can't recall if he used the term David Lang, but the story of the man walking through the field, suddenly disappearing in sight of others,
Mm-hmm.
that was Ambrose Bierce. There are a couple people that wrote about that there was a Joe Mulholland guy who crafted this story and told it in kind of like speaking circuits.
Mm-hmm.
I did try to do some digging in that. I couldn't find any evidence of that, but I will be the first to admit my digging wasn't the most robust in preparation for
Well,
this on
well,
that
again,
score.
the problem too is some of the, I think we talked about this recently, is people used to do so many speaking and lecture tours
Yeah.
that like if they did it, there are like people don't realize how the ephemera associated with those events is kind of like shows nowadays where it's like unless you have the flyers, like it's really hard to prove that it ever actually happened. So,
Well, I
you
would say
know,
too, it's more like
yeah.
comedy even because up until recently, with everybody taping everything all the
Right.
time, you would hear about Robin Williams was somewhat famous for, was he stealing jokes or was he just hearing things and then coming out? But
Then riffing, yeah.
joke theft was a big thing, but there were some people that would take people's acts, and then there were people
Hmm.
that would take concepts and run with them a bit.
Right,
And
right.
so I think that's it. Some people, again, I think it was two different writers I saw wrote about this Mulholland guy, and I think one of them said that it was something like a yarn spinning contest where people
Okay.
would tell
Just do right,
deliberate
right.
tall tales that they had
Yeah,
created.
yeah.
Regardless, Ambrose Bierce definitely was the first known to write this story down,
Okay.
and then Stuart Palmer's adaptation with the daughter in the 1920s and everything,
Expanded.
he
Okay.
expands upon it, and the whole letter, I think he was trying to create sort of a hoax type thing.
Hmm.
I don't know what came of that because again, it wasn't, when did Palmer die? I think Palmer died 1960s. So the expose where it yeah, 1968 he dies. So this expose where it's the stories of Palmer's is debunked doesn't come out until he's been dead a few years.
Right, right.
So yeah, and the other thing is, and here's where things connect. That first story,
Back to the Charles Ashmore story.
thank you,
Yeah.
also Ambrose Bierce.
Oh, okay. Well,
So
okay.
yeah,
That checks out.
I
It's
went
all
looking
everything.
for
It's all
I
Ambrose
went
Pierce.
looking for this story of this young boy
Yeah.
that I remember reading about, and I
That's so
swear
cool.
to you, the book I read it in
Hmm.
was telling the story as though this really happened.
Right, right.
And he just lifted into the sky. So I wish I could find that book, but again, Ambrose Bierce wrote that, you know, probably at least 80 years prior.
Yeah.
So did the book I picked it up that I read as a child, did one of those things like the story got told, and it became detached from its
From the
source, and
original
now
source
this other book
context.
is telling it like, hey, this tale's been going around this area of I think Indiana for a
Right.
long while now. This supposedly happened. This is a
Which
real
might be true.
story.
Yeah, that's the thing is there is a scenario there where you can have an author who's digging into regional folklore and here's a story that someone says this is a story that we have around here. And then so that second author or that third author in this case may have been reporting on legitimate folklore that just was passed off as Like, so no ill intent or
Right.
no intentional misrepresentation could have been happening there. Or
Well,
maybe you just didn't read the back of the book very well, and like
that's again, or
possible.
maybe I
Yeah.
did, but after
Yeah.
like 30 years,
Right.
um, it reminds
Precisely.
me too of, you were in a band with me for a while
Hmm.
more recently, and we were playing a song for years. And you said, "Oh, I never you heard another version of it." You're like, "I never
Hmm.
realized that song was a cover." I'm like, "Well, Brendan, it's
Right.
not really a cover, it's a folk song. I mean,
Right.
I think it was
Yeah.
first recorded in 1928. That doesn't make
Right.
it a cover because,
Right. Cover wouldn't have been the right term for it. Yeah.
but this kind of like the folktale
Yeah.
where, oh no, this was at one point commercially crafted,
Right.
but now it exists to everybody sort of thing. But now its
Hmm.
origins are kind of murkier. They become detached from the initial author, so now it kind of belongs to everybody. Is it a true story? No,
But it's
no,
folklore at
it's
that point,
not. But
or could be, depending on
right,
how it
how
was,
you
how,
feel folklore is.
right, exactly.
It's like, can folk music be created in a studio? Or
Hmm.
does folk music happen on people's porches and can then be brought to a studio?
Right. Well, and I think that, like, yes, there is like a semantic element of that, and there is a perspective element to that that are important whenever you're trying to decide, like, okay, where did the story come from? And we're obviously being a little more academic about it in that sense, which has its absolutely has its place. Um, but that doesn't preclude it from being a fun story, one way or the other,
Not at all. Well, think about this.
So,
There's a story I read when I was probably between 6 and 10 years old,
hmm,
right? And I'm 40, and I still
you
think
still
of this
remember it.
story periodically. So
Hmm.
that tells you like the idea was captivating, and
Right.
there was a time that I definitely thought it was a true story, or at least it was
Hmm.
somebody trying to purport a true
It was
story to
reported
me.
as a true story. Yeah.
And my feelings about the validity of that story have changed over time,
Hmm.
but it still stuck with me. So I think
Right.
there's a
It
lot
doesn't.
to that.
Yeah.
And so I think if there really was this Joel Mulholland guy who
Hmm.
was this yarn teller, competitive
Right.
storyteller on a speaking circuit told this, and 400 people showed up and heard that story, and it struck them the same way. They could be telling it, and it can vary. Did that happen? And Ambrose Bierce hears a telling of that story and modifies it. Ambrose Bierce
Right.
famously, it was kind of a hoaxer himself because he would put a lot of detail into places he had never
Right.
been and whatnot.
Hmm.
And so, like having a date, that makes me think, oh, that almost certainly originates with Bierce's telling of the tale.
Because that fits his kind of profile as far as how
100%
he would construct those
has
things.
his
Yeah.
signature sound on it.
Right. Right.
So
That's a good way of putting
yeah,
it. Yeah. Yeah.
and again, it was really interesting for me to go try to find this one story,
Hmm.
find a different story, but as I'm reading that story and I'm learning about it, other people have made the connection. Well, hey, not only does that come from Ambrose Bierce, but Ambrose Bierce also wrote this story, and I'm reading that story. I'm like, oh
Yeah.
my gosh, this
It's
was
all
the
the
story I
same.
was trying to find in the first place.
That's so funny. No, and it is wild how because a lot of this stuff is like a spider's web, and every once in a while you do end up like accidentally circling back on something where you're just like, oh, this all relates, and how it's
Yeah,
smaller world than what we think sometimes.
100%. But
So
I found it really interesting. It was an accidental discovery. I thought I was going to come across a tale that was somewhat true, but then some people are like, well, no, with regard to this young man, he was probably actually carried off by a mountain lion and carried up a tree or something. And so they
right,
heard him in a
ugh,
tree or, yeah,
right,
something awful, something
right.
awful.
It was probably,
I
if
don't
it's
know what it
true, it's
could be,
probably
but I
worse than
thought,
what we think. Yeah.
right.
Right.
It's definitely not as clean, but I thought that was what I was going to encounter. Not something where it's like, oh no, this was a whole cloth creation, almost certainly
Hmm.
from this professional writer of spooky, macabre, and mysterious tales. So it was exciting.
Yeah.
not only to find this story, but to learn that about it and to learn about it in such kind of a circuitous manner. So I
Right.
enjoyed doing this, and I enjoy both of these stories, even though, again, I cannot stress enough, there is absolutely no evidence
Right.
at all.
Yeah.
These are definitely not real stories. And I was happy to see that when I was looking up online.
Uh-huh.
It seems that most people understand that.
Right.
Because I know there's been some people, I've seen some.
Oh, we see it happen all the time. Yeah.
Well, early on, I
Yeah.
remember in particular about a haunted car. And
Oh, yep.
I was
Yep.
very clear about that as the Golden Eagle.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is definitely the creation of this writer. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to say a writer in Maine, not who is not Stephen King, but a
Right.
writer in Maine created that. And I've been really kind of taken aback. Some places I've seen repeat that story
Mm-hmm.
as though her telling is to be trusted at
Right.
face value, and it definitely is not,
Is not.
because
Yeah.
I did just a minimal amount of looking and I found a lot of really big gaping holes, and I know that
Right.
you saw that as well.
Right. In the
So
episode. Yeah.
while I listen and I really enjoy a lot of people on YouTube and podcasts and
Right.
whatnot
Right.
about spooky stories and current stories,
Oh, it
um,
is. Yeah.
yeah, I was taken aback by especially a couple people in particular. Not because I'm like, oh, I thought you could do better, because I'm not that person.
No,
But
but
just
it's.
you didn't look at all,
Oh
or
no, I was just talking to another friend of ours who's a podcaster, and talking about like our level of disappointment sometimes when we hear other people passing off stories that, like, again, like, if we who are not professionals can figure something out with 45 minutes of dedicated research and one cup of coffee, other people should be able to do that too. Yeah. I think it's like,
100%. And
you
that,
know,
that's why, like I said it earlier, kind of as a
some
joke, like
stuff.
we
Yeah.
don't get into the real nitty gritty because there's a lot of people out there that are really delving into every nook and cranny of a
Right.
story. And that's great. I don't want to be that, because
Right.
I would hope that we're trying to dig into different stories and talking with authors
Right.
so that you can go and let them give you the nitty gritty.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I just like having these conversations,
Oh,
and yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, so if there's any stories out there that you, dear listener, have learned through research was either not true or maybe was true, what's something that I'd love to hear a story that someone has where they're like, oh, this is too wild to be factual. Then you dig into it and you're proven otherwise. If you have any of those stories you'd like us to look into, or just have stories yourselves, we'd love to hear them. So if you want, you can reach out to us as always on Instagram and YouTube at the Ghost Furnace Podcast, or you can send us an email at the ghostfurnacepodcast@gmail.com.